Snow fell quietly on a small American city, the kind of silence that makes memories speak louder than words. For 2 long years, a little girl had vanished without a trace. No witnesses, no clues, just an empty playground and a broken community. Then one winter morning, a retired Navy SEAL took his usual walk, wearing the same uniform he once wore in war, guided only by his German Shepherd, a dog trained to never forget a scent. The dog stopped, refused to move on, and led his handler toward a place no one had searched, because no one believed a child could survive there. What they found buried beneath the snow would reopen an old wound and reveal a truth darker and more hopeful than anyone imagined. If you believe stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances still matter, subscribe now. This journey is just beginning. Spokane, Washington wore winter like an old uniform, proud, unforgiving, and impossible to ignore. The city sat under a sky the color of dull steel, where sunlight didn't warm so much as glare, bouncing off snow until every street looked sugar-dusted and every breath came out in pale ghosts. The Spokane River moved like a dark ribbon through white banks, and the wind, sharp as a reprimand, ran down avenues, rattling bare branches and making porch chimes sing like nervous laughter. Out near the edges, where the city thinned into pines and forgotten service roads, the world turned quieter. The kind of quiet that didn't comfort so much as listen back. Jack Carter knew that quiet. He had spent years in places where silence meant either safety or a trap. 35, broad-shouldered and built with the dense, efficient strength of a man who didn't waste motion, he carried himself like he still belonged to a unit, even now, even here. His face was a landscape of angles, a strong jaw with a faint cleft, cheekbones cut sharp enough to catch the winter light, and a nose that looked like it had once argued with something harder than a pillow and lost. A short beard, dark with a few early threads of gray, lined his jaw in a neat, disciplined way, more habit than vanity. His eyes were the sort you didn't lie to, a steady hazel that had learned how to watch without staring, how to care without begging. People in town called him the SEAL, half in awe, half because they didn't know what else to do with a man who kept his past folded tight like a flag. He wore the one thing about him that never changed. His Navy working uniform in green digital camouflage, continuous pattern across the entire jacket, front placket, chest area, pocket flaps. No solid panels, no breaks, no softness. It wasn't practical for a morning walk, but Jack didn't wear it for practicality. He wore it because routine kept the ghosts quiet, because when the fabric sat right on his shoulders, the world felt measurable again. Because a man can survive almost anything if he can convince his mind it still has a mission. Beside him moved Ranger, a 9-year-old German Shepherd with the kind of presence that made people step aside without knowing why. His coat was dark sable with a heavy black overlay, his back and neck draped in deep shadow like a cloak, his body shifting into rich, darker sable, his legs and underside a warm tan, like sunlight trying to survive on the underside of winter. His fur was thick and natural, not glossy, not silver, not gray, no show dog shine, just weather and work. His muzzle had begun to frost with age, and a pale scar, thin as a whisper, showed above one hip where something sharp had once tried to end his career. His amber eyes were alive in a way that felt almost unfair for an animal who had seen as much as he had. Ranger wasn't merely trained, he was experienced. The kind of dog who didn't just follow commands, he evaluated them. People assumed Jack had adopted him because he needed company. Jack knew the truth was the other way around. Ranger had adopted him, in that quiet, stubborn way dogs do, the way they decide a human is theirs and then begin the slow work of keeping him from falling apart. They walked along a trail that skirted the outskirts, past frozen puddles, past fences capped with snow, past a park that looked abandoned even in daylight. Winter had a way of making every playground look like a crime scene. The swings were stiff with ice. The metal slide wore a skin of frost. The bright plastic structures looked faded beneath white drifts, like toys left out too long after the children went home. The city maintained the place, but not with love, more with the weary diligence of a community that had learned what happens when you stop paying attention. 2 years ago, a little girl had vanished from this area. The name still sat in Spokane's throat like a bone: Emily. Jack had lived in a dozen worlds where children disappeared and never came back. But this was different. This was home adjacent. This was the kind of tragedy that made grocery store conversations go quiet and made elderly women at church press hands to their mouths and whisper prayers they didn't fully believe would be answered. Posters had faded in shop windows. Ribbons had frayed on lampposts. The town had moved on in the way towns do, because rent was due and work needed doing and grief doesn't pay bills, but it never really forgot. It just learned to carry the hurt like an old injury that flares when the weather changes. Jack hadn't known Emily, not personally. He knew her the way you know a star you never met, by the way people looked up and wished. He took a breath, tasting cold pine and distant chimney smoke. "Heel," he said, quiet and calm. Ranger walked properly for about 6 steps. Then the dog stopped. Not the casual pause of a dog who'd spotted a squirrel or decided to renegotiate the laws of obedience. This was different. Ranger's ears rose and pivoted forward, his tail lowered, rigid. His nose dropped to the snow, and his body tightened like a coiled spring. Jack felt it in his own spine, the old instinct waking up, the soldier in him cracking an eye open. "Ranger," Jack said again, more firmly. "Heel." Ranger ignored him. Jack didn't get angry. He didn't yank the leash. You didn't bully a dog like Ranger. You listened to him. Ranger began to pull, not wild, not frantic, but deliberate, like he'd found a thread and meant to follow it, and any human who got in the way was simply choosing to be dragged into the truth. Jack's boots crunched as he let himself be led off the familiar trail. They pushed through a line of trees where the snow lay in soft, bright drifts that looked harmless until you stepped wrong and sank to your knees. The light here was different, still bright, but filtered through branches, slicing the world into pale gold and deep blue shadow. The air smelled older, damp beneath the cold, like earth that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. Ranger's low growl started then, not loud, not theatrical. It came from deep in his chest, a warning meant for Jack alone. "What is it, buddy?" Jack murmured, the way you talk to a teammate when the radio is dead and the ground might be wired. He crouched, gloved hand hovering near Ranger's neck, not to restrain him, but to steady the moment. Ranger's nose traced a curve through the snow, slow and exact. Jack followed the line Ranger indicated and saw it. Footprints, small, too small for an adult, a child's shoe maybe. The prints were not crisp. Time had softened their edges, but they were there, pressed into the snow like a message that refused to be erased. They didn't move in a neat line. They staggered, angled, sped up, then faltered. The pattern had panic in it, the kind of erratic rhythm you see when someone is running without knowing where safety is. Jack's throat tightened. He knelt beside the tracks, the snow soaking cold into his knees. Ranger stood over him like a sentinel, nose still working, breath steaming. 2 years, Jack whispered without meaning to. It can't be. But the woods didn't care what he believed. The woods only offered evidence. Ranger pulled again, guiding Jack into a small clearing near the edge of the old playground, the kind of forgotten space no one visited unless they had a reason to be there or a secret to bury. The snow here was slightly uneven, as if something had shifted beneath it and settled again. Jack scanned the area with a methodical calm that came from training, the kind of calm that was less emotion and more procedure. Ranger stopped at a shallow dip in the snow and began to paw at it, careful at first, then more insistent. He didn't dig like a dog playing. He dug like a dog who knew the difference between dirt and discovery. "Easy," Jack said, though his pulse had begun to climb. He crouched and brushed away snow with his glove, then with his bare fingers when the gloves felt too clumsy. Under the thin crust of ice lay something metallic, dulled by cold. Jack freed it slowly, as if haste might make the world explode. A small piece of silver, not a coin, not trash. A fragment of a child's bracelet, tarnished, scratched, but unmistakably delicate. Jack turned it in the light. A thin plate was attached, and despite the grime and age, letters still showed, engraved in looping script. Emily. The name hit him like a punch to the chest. His mind flashed to the old posters, the tired faces on the news, the candlelight vigils that looked brave until you realized they were mostly a way to keep from screaming. Jack's hand tightened around the metal until the cold bit his skin. Ranger whined softly, a sound that didn't ask for praise, only acknowledged the weight of what had been found. Jack swallowed hard and forced himself to breathe. This wasn't Kandahar. This wasn't a mission overseas with 1,000 moving parts and an enemy you could name. This was a little American city with snow on its sidewalks and a missing child whose name had been carried like a prayer. He pulled out his phone with fingers that felt clumsy in the cold. The signal was weak, but present, one bar like the world offering him exactly one chance. He scrolled and tapped the contact he'd saved under the plainest name possible, as if a plain name made plain outcomes more likely. Tom Brooks. Tom answered on the second ring, his voice low and rough with mourning. Sheriff's office. Tom, it's Jack Carter, Jack said, keeping his tone steady the way he'd learned to keep his breathing steady under pressure. I'm out near the old park line, north side by the tree break. Ranger found something. There was a pause, the kind that meant Tom was already bracing himself. Tom Brooks was in his late 50s, a man who looked like he'd been carved from weather and responsibility. Broad frame, thick neck, gray hair kept short, and a mustache that made him seem older than he was. He was well liked in Spokane because he spoke to people like they mattered. But cases like Emily's had put a permanent shadow under his eyes. Some failures don't just haunt the family, they haunt the whole town, and they haunt the man whose job it is to bring people home. What did you find? Tom asked, and his voice had changed, less small talk, more steel. A bracelet fragment, Jack said. Silver, name engraved, Emily. Silence on the line went heavy, as if the air itself had swallowed sound. Then Tom exhaled, slow and controlled, like a man trying not to crack. Don't touch anything else, he said, the command snapping into place. Mark your exact spot. Stay put. Keep the area secure. Understood, Jack replied. He glanced at Ranger, who stood rigid, watching the trees as if they were capable of lying. I'll hold. Jack, Tom added, softer now, like a man speaking to another man instead of a sheriff speaking to a witness. You sure? Jack stared at the name in his palm. I'm sure. All right, Tom said. I'm coming. The call ended. The cold returned to its full sharpness, as if the conversation had been a thin blanket now pulled away. Jack slipped the bracelet fragment into a small evidence bag he carried, old habit, old preparedness, and then stood, scanning the clearing the way you scan a room you don't trust. Ranger sat at his side for half a second, then his head turned sharply toward the deeper tree line. His ears shot up, stiff as flags, his whole body tensed. Jack followed his gaze and saw nothing at first, just snow, trunks, branches. Then, between two pines, something moved, a shape sliding through the white like a shadow that didn't belong to winter sun. Ranger's bark snapped out. Short, sharp, not the joyful noise of a dog greeting life, but the alarm of a soldier calling contact. Jack's hand went instinctively to his side as if a rifle should be there. His heart kicked hard once, then steadied into a cold, focused rhythm. The shadow vanished behind the trees, swallowed by the bright snow and dark wood. Jack leaned close to Ranger, voice low. Stay, he murmured, not as a command, but as a promise. In the harsh, glittering morning, the city felt far away. The snow looked innocent, the woods did not. And somewhere beyond those pines, something, or someone, had just realized the past was no longer buried. The clearing did not stay quiet for long. Patrol lights arrived first, washing the snow in rotating bands of red and blue that felt almost obscene against the clean winter brightness. Spokane County deputies moved carefully, boots crunching with the deliberate patience of people who understood how easily evidence could be crushed into nothing. They were good men and women, local, practical, dressed in layers that smelled faintly of coffee and road salt, but the ground had already begun its slow erasure. Sunlight softened the edges of the child's footprints. A whisper of wind skimmed powder into hollows. Time, patient as a tide, licked at everything until certainty blurred. Jack stood a few steps back with Ranger at his side, watching the way professionals work when they know they're late. Sheriff Tom Brooks arrived in a white SUV and stepped out with the weight of the town on his shoulders, broad and solid, gray hair tight at the temples, a mustache trimmed with the same discipline he applied to his voice. He nodded to Jack once, gratitude and dread sharing the same look, then bent to study the ground, already understanding what the winter was doing to the truth. Ranger did not care about patrol lights or procedures. His attention remained fixed on a ribbon of air the humans could not read. The dog's posture shifted again, ears forward, spine taut, his nose dipping, lifting, dipping, as if measuring a story written in layers of old breath and older fear. Jack recognized the change and moved when Ranger moved, not announcing it, not asking permission. Tom noticed and fell in beside them, signaling a deputy to shadow from a distance. The trail Ranger followed was not the obvious one. It cut away from the park and into the trees, where the snow lay thinner under boughs and the cold smelled like stone. The dog tracked a scent that was no longer fresh. Old in the language of handlers, but old did not mean gone. It meant buried, and Ranger was good at graves. They reached the slope where the ground broke unevenly, roots gripping like knuckles through frozen soil. Here the light changed. Snow still brightened the world, but shadows pooled, blue and deep, and the air carried a dampness that had nothing to do with weather. Jack spotted the first sign before Ranger did. A young pine bent and snapped cleanly toward the hillside, the break pale and old, not torn by wind or weight. A few yards farther, a drag mark scored the snow, a shallow trough where something heavy had been pulled, paused, pulled again. Tom's mouth tightened. He made a note and said nothing. The mouth of the earth revealed itself the way secrets often do, by accident. Ranger pawed aside a curtain of dead ivy and roots, whining low, and there it was, a narrow opening reinforced by rotted timbers, half swallowed by time and snow. An abandoned shaft forgotten by maps and maintenance, breathing out a cold that felt older than winter. The deputies exchanged looks. Someone muttered, "Jesus," not his prayer, but his punctuation. Tom raised a hand and the group froze. Jack crouched, studying the edges. The opening was no wider than a man's shoulders, its frame splintered, the boards dark with age. The snow just outside it was disturbed, compacted, then smoothed again. Careful work. Whoever had used this place knew how to hide. They entered one at a time, lights up, voices down. The tunnel swallowed sound. Headlamps cut through darkness and struck ice blooming along the walls, throwing back hard white reflections that made the space feel brighter than it should have been. The floor was uneven, damp stones slick beneath thin frost, and the air tasted wrong, metallic and stale, with a thread of human scent that did not belong underground. Ranger moved first, not charging, not hesitating, the way a good operator moves when the world narrows to a task. He ignored a collapsed side passage and followed the main line, claws clicking softly, tail low, focus absolute. Jack followed, boots placed with care, hand steady on the light. He noted details automatically, tool marks long dulled by rust, timbers gnawed by rot, a scatter of debris that suggested a century of neglect interrupted by recent intent. Halfway in, Jack stopped. The beam caught another sign, a branch wedged against the wall at shoulder height, its bark scraped clean where something had brushed past again and again. Ahead, the drag mark reappeared as a faint smear in damp grit. Ranger's breathing changed. He whined, then pressed on. The tunnel opened into a small chamber where the ceiling lifted just enough to breathe easier. In one corner lay a tumble of old boards and a rusted shovel head, artifacts of miners who had come for ore and left with stories. In another, a recess cut into the rock, sheltered from the line of the entrance. Ranger veered toward it and began to scratch, fast and precise, sending pebbles skittering. "Easy," Jack said, low. Ranger stopped, panting, eyes bright with urgency. Jack knelt and brushed aside loose dirt with gloved fingers. He found fabric first, a small scrap, faded pink, the weave fine, the edge torn rather than cut. Children's clothing. He bagged it, the motion automatic. Then his light lifted, and he saw the carving. It was shallow, clumsy, done with a small hard edge by a hand that did not yet know patience. A house with a tall, crooked tower, a door too big, windows like surprised eyes. A child's idea of a castle. The word came to him uninvited and stayed. Tom swore under his breath. A deputy swallowed hard and looked away. Jack felt the weight of it settle in his chest, not the sharp shock of discovery, but the heavy certainty that this place had been used, deliberately, for something that took time. He finished bagging the scrap, photographed the carving, and backed out, leaving the chamber as undisturbed as he could. Outside, the day had slipped toward dusk. The snow still glowed, but the light had thinned, shadows lengthening between trunks. Procedures took over. Evidence was logged. The opening was marked. The deputies did what they could against a clock that had already stolen years. Jack turned everything over and said little. His instincts argued with the idea of an accident or a simple abandonment. Places like this were chosen, not stumbled into. He shook Tom's hand and thanked the deputies, then walked Ranger back toward the trail as the first stars began to show, pinpricks in a sky that looked bruised but unbroken. The city lights were faint here, distant and unconvincing. Winter made liars of them. His cabin sat at the edge of the woods, modest and clean, a rectangle of warmth cut from cold. Jack fed Ranger, checked the locks out of habit, and poured coffee he did not need. The quiet returned, not the gentle kind, but the listening kind. He sat at the small table, uniform still on, boots left by the door, and stared at the wall where nothing hung. When his phone vibrated, the sound seemed too loud. An unknown number. No preview. He opened it. "Don't dig too deep. The castle doesn't want to wake." Jack read it twice, then a third time, the words sinking like hooks. Ranger lifted his head from the floor, ears pricked, amber eyes searching Jack's face. Jack exhaled slowly and set the phone down. Somewhere beyond the trees, the ground held its breath. Morning returned to Spokane with a hard, brilliant glare, the kind of winter light that made the world look honest even when it wasn't. Snow lay untouched on rooftops and pine boughs, reflecting the sun so fiercely it hurt the eyes, as if the city itself were daring anyone to look away. Jack Carter stood outside his cabin with a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand. Ranger seated at his side, both of them facing the tree line like sentries at the edge of an old battlefield. The anonymous message from the night before still echoed in Jack's mind, not as fear, but as irritation, the sort that came when someone assumed he could be warned off his own conscience. Castles didn't scare him. Silence did. The low thrum of engines announced the arrival before the vehicles appeared. Two black SUVs moved carefully along the narrow access road, dark shapes cutting through white like ink through paper. FBI. Jack didn't straighten or shift. He simply watched, measuring posture and pace the way he always had. The lead SUV stopped, its door opening with deliberate calm, and a woman stepped out who did not belong to Winter but had learned to function inside it. Sarah Reed was tall and spare, built like someone who had learned early how to carry herself without excess. Her coat was dark and practical, cut close to her frame, and her boots were scuffed from real use, not fashion. A wool cap hid most of her hair, but what showed at the edges was dark brown, pulled back tight in a way that suggested impatience with things that got in the way. Her skin was pale with a faint sallow cast, the kind that came from long hours under fluorescent lights and not enough sleep. Her face held sharp intelligence, high cheekbones, a straight nose, lips usually set in a line that meant listening rather than agreeing. Her eyes were gray, alert and tired in the particular way of someone who had trained herself not to feel surprise anymore. When she looked at Jack, it wasn't with skepticism so much as calibration. Behind her came two agents and a small forensic team, their movements efficient, quiet, respectful of the cold. Sarah approached Jack first, extending a gloved hand. "Jack Carter," she said, her voice even, measured. "I'm Special Agent Sarah Reed. Thank you for preserving the scene." Jack shook her hand, noting the firm grip, the lack of hesitation. "You came fast." Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "We don't like ghosts," she said. "And this case has been one for too long." Her gaze dropped to Ranger, who sat calmly, eyes on her, evaluating. "That your partner?" "Always," Jack replied. Sarah crouched, careful not to crowd the dog. Ranger sniffed her glove once, then looked away, uninterested. That, Jack noticed, seemed to earn a fraction more of her respect than obedience would have. They moved together toward the marked entrance of the mine as the forensics team took over with quiet ritual, photographing, measuring, documenting as if the past could be pinned down by angles and numbers. Inside, the air remained cold and wrong, but now it carried the faint chemical notes of investigation. Sarah listened as Jack spoke, not just describing what had been found, but how Ranger had behaved, the hesitation, the focus, the way the dog had ignored false trails. Jack spoke like he was delivering a debrief, stripped of drama, precise. Sarah didn't interrupt. She asked questions that showed she understood structure, timing, direction, sequence. When he finished, she stood still for a moment, absorbing it. "You trust him," she said, nodding toward Ranger. "With my life," Jack answered without emphasis. Sarah exhaled slowly. "Then I'll trust him too." The discovery came late morning, after the team had nearly finished combing the chamber where the carving had been found. One of the forensic techs, a young man with careful hands and eyes already dulled by too much human damage, noticed a stone set at an odd angle near the back wall. It wasn't fallen. It had been placed. When they moved it, they found a small cavity behind it, dry despite the damp around it. Inside was a notebook wrapped in plastic, sealed with care. Sarah took it herself, hands suddenly gentle in a way that contrasted with her sharp edges. The notebook was small, the kind sold in grocery stores for school lists and half-finished dreams. Its cover showed a unicorn prancing beneath a rainbow, colors faded but stubbornly bright. Jack felt something tighten in his chest. Children hid the things they loved where they believed love would keep them safe. They gathered near the entrance where the light was strongest, snow glare pouring in. Sarah opened the notebook slowly. The pages were warped but intact, the ink smudged in places, but readable. The handwriting was large and uneven, letters looping and collapsing into one another the way children write when they are thinking faster than their hands can move. Sarah read aloud, her voice low, professional, but something softened around the edges as the words took shape. It wasn't a diary in the way adults kept diaries. It was a story. "The Queen of Light will come," she read. "She has hair like the sun and eyes like the sky. She rides a white horse and carries a sword that cuts lies in half." Jack closed his eyes briefly. He could see it. The way a child would turn terror into myth, darkness into a villain that could be beaten if named properly. Sarah turned pages, each entry a chapter in a private war. The villain had a name too. The Shadow King, who lived in a castle of stone and silence. He told the princess no one was looking for her anymore, that the world had moved on. Jack opened his eyes and met Sarah's gaze. "That's not fantasy," he said quietly. "That's conditioning." Sarah hesitated. "It's coping," she countered automatically. "It's survival," Jack replied. "Maps drawn in a language adults forget how to read." The notebook described places in metaphor. The castle had a tower and a door that screamed when opened. The path to it was called the Trail of Fear, full of slipping stones and cold water that bit like teeth. The princess counted days by scratches she made on the wall when the Shadow King wasn't looking. She learned where water dripped cleanest, where the ground stayed dry. Sarah stopped reading at the final page. The handwriting changed there, smaller, tighter, lines pressing hard into the paper. "Today," they said, "we will be moved," she read. Beneath it was a simple drawing, a shape like a mountain peak, with wings sketched at the sides. Sarah closed the notebook carefully and looked up. "An eagle," she said. "Or a hawk." "Osprey," Jack said before he could stop himself. Sarah studied him. "Why?" Jack gestured toward the drawing. "The wings aren't spread wide, they're angled, and the beak hooked. It's how kids around here draw ospreys. They see them fishing over the river." Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. Sarah turned back to the notebook, then to the dark mouth of the mine. "Or," she said slowly, "it's just a bird." Jack shook his head once. Fear doesn't draw randomly. They exited the mine into the bright day, snow still blinding, still clean. Procedures resumed. The notebook was sealed, catalogued, photographed. Sarah's team began cross-referencing everything, old reports, maps, sightings, trying to force data out of poetry. Jack watched, knowing both approaches mattered. Logic built the bridge. Instinct decided where to place it. By afternoon, Sarah stood apart from her team, phone pressed to her ear, posture rigid. When she finished, she approached Jack, her expression unreadable. "We'll keep processing," she said, "but until we have something solid, this stays theoretical." Jack nodded. "I understand." She hesitated, then added, "I don't dismiss what you're saying. I just can't lead with it." "Yet," Jack said. Her mouth curved faintly, in acknowledgement. "Yet." Dusk came early, the light thinning, shadows stretching long fingers through the snow. The agents packed up, leaving markers and cameras in place. Sarah offered Jack a card, crisp and plain. "If you remember anything else," she said, "anything at all." Jack took it. "You'll be the first call." Rangers stood suddenly, ears forward. Jack followed his gaze, but there was nothing now, only trees and snow, and the ordinary quiet of winter. The moment passed. That night, back at his cabin, Jack sat at the table again. the notebook's words replaying in his mind like coordinates. Castles, trails of fear, birds drawn by a child who had learned to encode terror into stories. He unlocked his phone, the anonymous message still there, glowing faintly in the dark. He typed nothing. He didn't need to. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and somewhere high above the river, an osprey cried into the cold. Daylight stripped the mystery down to its bones. Snow outside Jack Carter's cabin flared white, a hard glare that turned the window into a screen of static, and the drawing lay on the table like a signal flare finally seen in daylight. Ranger rested beside Jack's chair, his long, dark sable body stretched with the patience of a veteran who understood waiting, amber eyes fixed not on the paper but on Jack's hands. The room smelled of coffee and cold pine, the kind of quiet that invites truth to speak if you give it time. Jack studied the child's lines again, the crooked tower, the door too big, the path sketched with jagged stones. He stopped trying to read it like evidence and let it sit in his chest like memory. That was when the face behind the drawing appeared, not as a monster, but as a man the town had already half forgotten and half feared. Jed Stone. The name surfaced with the inevitability of an old wound flaring when the weather turns. Jed wasn't a ghost. He was a fixture on the margins, a recluse who lived beyond the plowed roads, where cell service thinned and stories thickened. Jack had seen him once from a distance years ago, tall, broad, moving with the deliberate economy of someone who did not expect company. The locals spoke of him with a shrug and a warning, the way people talk about storms that come every season, gray-bearded, weather-carved, eyes pale as winter creek water. Jed had a reputation for solitude sharpened into suspicion. Hikers said he watched from the trees. Parents used his name to hurry children home before dark. None of it rose to the level of crime. All of it fit the shape of the giant with a gray beard in a frightened child's myth. Jack felt the click of alignment in his mind, the way a map snaps into focus when you stop forcing it. Ranger lifted his head as if he'd felt it too, ears pricked, muzzle angling toward the door. Jack traced the drawing's path with a finger, following the jagged line away from the tower. Trail of fear, he murmured. He knew it, not by name, but by muscle memory. The creek bed that locals avoided in winter because it iced unevenly, because stones turned treacherous under a skim of melt and refreeze, because wind funneled through the cut and stole breath. A route that would feel endless and punishing to a child forced to walk it, each step teaching dread. It wasn't random. It was efficient. It was chosen. The knock came clean and firm. Jack opened the door to Sarah Reed, the winter light sharpening the angles of her face. Without the wool cap, her dark hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, revealing a pale forehead and the faint crease between her brows that suggested thinking didn't turn off easily for her. She carried a tablet and a thermos, and her posture, straight, economical, looked like a habit earned under pressure. Ranger rose, sniffed once, then sat again, judgment rendered. Sarah noted it without comment. "You look like you solved something," she said, stepping inside and stamping snow from her boots. "I stopped trying to," Jack replied. He slid the drawing across the table. "This isn't a fairy tale. It's a route." Sarah studied it in silence, gray eyes moving with a methodical patience. "You're thinking Jed Stone," she said at last. Jack nodded. "The giant and the path, there's only one that fits." Sarah's jaw tightened. "That's a theory built on metaphor." "It's built on survival," Jack said evenly. "Fear teaches geography." She exhaled through her nose, a concession without surrender. "If you're right, approaching him wrong could spook him. He disappears deeper, and we lose whatever chance we have." "Which is why you don't bring a parade," Jack said. "Small team. Quiet. We look before we knock." Sarah glanced at Ranger. "And your partner?" "He comes," Jack said. "He already knows the way." By mid-morning, the light was still brutal, snow throwing glare back at the sky as if daring clouds to return. They moved on foot beyond the last plowed spur, leaving vehicles where engines would not betray them. The creek bed began as a suggestion, a ribbon of darker snow, then bare stone glazed in ice. Ranger led with a measured confidence, paws finding purchase where boots would slip, tail low, breath steady. Jack followed, weight balanced, his NWU breaking his outline against the trees, digital camouflage dissolving him into the forest's geometry. Sarah moved behind him, careful and capable, boots tested before committed, eyes always up. She had learned caution the hard way. Years ago, she'd told Jack once, a witness she trusted vanished between interviews because she pushed too fast. She had not forgiven herself. Since then, she let evidence breathe. The creek narrowed, walls rising, wind cutting through like a blade. Jack saw it as the drawing had shown it, the stones that bit, the cold that punished hesitation. He imagined small feet slipping, hands scraping, the way terror would turn distance into an eternity. Ranger paused once, nose lifting, then pressed on. The scent here was different, less old, threaded with something fresher that made his ears angle and his pace tighten. Jack felt it register in his own spine, newer than the mine, recent enough to matter. They crested a low rise and the cabin appeared through the trees, set back from the creek on a bench of rock and packed snow. It was sturdier than rumor suggested, hand-hewn logs chinked with care, roof weighted against wind. Smoke rose in a thin, steady line from the chimney, blue-gray against white. Not a cooking fire that flared and died, a living one. Sarah slowed, hand lifting in a silent signal. They watched. The smoke did not waver. Someone was home, or had been very recently. Jed Stone stepped into focus at the edge of Jack's mind as a man rather than a story. He would be in his late 60s, maybe older, age etched into him by weather more than years. Tall, heavy in the shoulders, beard long and iron gray, hair worn back without vanity. A face carved by sun and cold, creased eyes that missed nothing, mouth set into a line that learned early not to explain itself. A man shaped by isolation into something sharp and brittle, who believed the world intruded and he was justified to resist it. Jack felt no pity, only a clear assessment. This was a place chosen for watching approaches, for controlling movement, for hiding in plain sight because people prefer not to see what makes them uncomfortable. Ranger stopped, head lifting, nostrils flaring. He did not growl. That absence was louder than sound. Jack felt the weight of the moment settle, the knowledge that a door stood between them and answers that would not come quietly. Sarah met his eyes. Her face had gone still, the tiredness replaced by focus. "We don't rush," she mouthed. They eased back into cover, widening their angle, testing the perimeter with the patience of hunters who understood prey could also be dangerous. Jack noted footprints near the woodpile, adult boots, deliberate. He also noted something smaller, half hidden where drift met log. He didn't point. He didn't need to. Ranger's body had already angled toward it, ears tight, breath shallow, fresh, not old fear, current. From their vantage, the cabin looked calm, almost domestic, smoke drawing a line of warmth into the sky. The contrast cut Jack more sharply than menace would have. He thought of the notebook, the Queen of Light, the castle named to make sense of a cage. He thought of the anonymous warning and felt a grim gratitude for it. Whoever sent it believed they were protecting something that could be woken. Jack intended to wake it gently, or not at all. Sarah's radio whispered once, then fell silent at her touch. She leaned closer. "We verify before we knock," she said. "If he bolts—" "He won't," Jack replied softly. "This place is a homestead, not a hide. He expects it to hold." Ranger shifted again, weight forward, a low vibration starting in his chest that stopped short of sound. Jack placed a hand on the dog's back, feeling muscle and heat under thick fur. "Easy," he breathed. Ranger held. They waited as the light began its slow tilt toward afternoon, snow still blinding, shadows lengthening like fingers reaching for the cabin's door. The smoke continued its quiet signal, steady as a heartbeat. Jack fixed the image in his mind, the drawing's tower translated into timber and stone, the trail of fear ending here. He knew how this part went. You could plan, you could calculate, but eventually you had to step out of cover and accept what answered. From the far side of the clearing, a board creaked. Sarah's hand tightened on her tablet. Jack's pulse settled into that old, cold rhythm. Ranger's ears snapped forward, nose lifting hard, the scent unmistakably new. The smoke rose, the cabin breathed, and somewhere between trees and door, a child's story pressed against the present, demanding to be believed. The approach came in full daylight, the kind that leaves nowhere to hide but shadow itself. Snow lay smooth and glaring, every contour exposed, every misstep unforgiving. Jack Carter moved last, Ranger tight to his knee, the dog's dark sable coat breaking his outline against the tree line. Sarah Reed signaled with 2 fingers and the team split without a word. Practice over bravado, patience over speed. They did not rush the cabin. They listened to it. Up close, the structure felt lived in, not abandoned. The logs were sealed against winter with careful hands. A stack of split wood stood sheltered beneath an overhang, the ends pale and dry. The chimney breathed a thin warmth into the cold, steady as a pulse. Jack tasted it in the air, smoke that had not yet learned to go stale. Sarah's jaw tightened. She motioned once, and the door was breached with a single controlled movement that favored surprise over force. The cabin answered with quiet. Inside, heat held on stubbornly, the room lit by snow glare through a small window and the dull orange glow of a stove that had been banked rather than fed. A bowl sat on the table with oatmeal half eaten, the surface filmed and cooling, a spoon resting where it had been dropped without ceremony. Jack's eyes swept the space, cataloging details: boots by the door, adult-sized, a heavy coat on a peg, a rifle rack with one space empty. Everything suggested routine interrupted, not flight completed. Ranger moved past Jack, nose low, tail rigid, breath measured. He stopped at the cot in the corner. The mattress was thin and old, but the blanket folded with care. There at the center was the indentation, small, shallow, unmistakable. The shape of a child's weight lingering in fabric like a memory refusing to fade. Jack felt the room tilt, the old discipline pulling him back into balance. On the pillow lay a wooden bird, hand-carved, wings chipped at the edges, the grain smoothed by touch. It was crude and careful at once, a thing made to last rather than impress. The symbol from the notebook had stepped into the world. Ranger's growl rolled low, not aggressive but distressed, the sound he made when fear had soaked into a place and stayed. Sarah absorbed it all in a glance. "Perimeter," she said softly. "Eyes out. No radio chatter unless it matters." Her voice carried authority without volume, the kind that made people listen because it had earned them safety before. The team melted into positions, a quiet ring tightening around the cabin, rifles angled down, attention up. Jack remained by the door, NWU dissolving him into the edge of the room, a cut of green-blue against white. He did not cross the threshold again. He did not need to. The answers were already speaking. Hoarfrost began to creep along the window edges as the light shifted. Afternoon leaned toward evening, the snow's glare softening into a lavender sheen. Jack's breath slowed. Each inhale counted, each exhale controlled. Ranger sat, alert, eyes tracking the world beyond the walls. Sarah stood near the stove, tablet lowered, gaze unfixed, listening for the moment when waiting ends and action begins. It came on a crunch of snow that did not belong to the wind. From the tree line, a figure moved with unhurried purpose, boots finding the same path they always did. Jed Stone emerged carrying a rabbit by the hind legs, the animal limp and pale against the white. A rifle hung easy in his other hand, not raised, not slung, carried the way men carry tools they know well. He was taller than Jack had imagined, shoulders broad beneath layers of canvas and wool. His beard fell thick and iron gray, catching ice crystals. His hair was pulled back, practical, his face a map of sunburn and winter, eyes pale and steady as creek ice. There was no surprise in him when he saw the cabin ringed by shadows, only calculation. "Jed Stone," Sarah called, stepping into view, voice clear. "Federal agents, set the rifle down." Jed did not flinch. He looked at her, then at Jack, then at Ranger. Something like recognition flickered, not fear, but assessment. He placed the rabbit on the snow, laid the rifle beside it, and raised his hands with a slow deliberation that felt almost ceremonial. The takedown was swift and quiet, practiced hands securing him before his weight shifted. Jed offered no resistance. He watched the sky as cuffs closed around his wrists, expression composed, almost disappointed. They sat him on a stump near the cabin, twilight painting the snow in bruised colors. Sarah crouched in front of him, eyes level. Up close, Jed smelled of smoke and iron and cold. His eyes were colorless in the fading light, focused inward, as if he were listening to a sermon only he could hear. "Where is Emily?" Sarah asked, the name steady in her mouth. Jed smiled. Not wide, not cruel. Pitying. "She wasn't taken," he said, voice gravelly and calm. "She was cleaned, made quiet." Jack felt his fists tighten, then release. Ranger's growl vibrated the snow, a warning meant for the world. "You kept a child in a hole," Sarah said, ice sharpening her words. "You fed her lies and called it mercy." Jed's gaze slid to Jack. "The world is loud," he said. "Poisoned, Children don't survive it without scars. We gave her silence. We? Sarah repeated. Jed's smile deepened just a fraction. He said nothing. They moved him to the edge of the clearing as the light finally gave up and night claimed the forest. Portable lamps bloomed, washing the snow in white that flattened shadows and erased nuance. Sarah stepped away, phone pressed to her ear, posture rigid. Jack watched the cabin breathe its last warmth into the cold and felt the weight of time press in. The bowl on the table, the indentation on the cot, the bird on the pillow. This was not a place of transit. It was a place of return. Sarah ended the call and came back to him. Her face had gone still, in the way it did when pieces aligned into something terrible. He came back on schedule, she said quietly. Same time, same path. Jack nodded. This isn't a bolt hole. No, Sarah agreed. It's a checkpoint. They stood together, the sound of cuffs and radios distant. Ranger pressed to Jack's leg, watching the dark. Sarah lowered her voice. If he misses a return window, if someone expects him, they'll know, Jack finished. And they'll move her. Sarah closed her eyes once, brief as a blink. When she opened them, the fatigue had burned away, leaving focus and a spark of anger that warmed more than the stove ever had. We just turned the hourglass, she said, and the sand is running fast. From the cabin window, the last of the stove's glow faded. The snow took on the cold shine of night. Jack looked at the wooden bird in his mind and thought of stories that kept children alive long enough to be found. Somewhere beyond the ring of light, the forest listened, and the path the child had been forced to walk waited to be walked again, this time by people who would not stop. The mobile command unit hummed with a nervous, fluorescent energy that had nothing to do with heat. Screens glowed, radios whispered, and people paced in tight arcs like thoughts that couldn't settle. Snow fell outside in clean sheets, bright even at night under floodlights, as if winter itself were unimpressed by human urgency. Jack Carter stood near the back, arms crossed, Ranger lying at his boots with his chin on his paws, amber eyes open and listening. The room felt wrong to Jack, not loud, not chaotic, but stalled. When a hunt loses its scent, it doesn't need more noise. It needs a better question. Sarah Reed stood at the center table, tall and spare, coat off now, sleeves rolled to the forearms as if effort alone might pull answers from the air. Her dark hair was still pulled tight, a practical line that mirrored the way she thought, straight, controlled, unforgiving of excess. She fielded updates without blinking, her pale face lit by screens that made the faint shadows beneath her eyes look deeper. Exhaustion lived there, but so did resolve. She had learned to carry both after years of cases that ended too late or not at all. When Jed Stone refused to speak beyond his doctrine, when the timeline fractured into guesswork, she felt the weight of the clock as a physical thing. Jack didn't wait for permission. He took a tablet from a tech who offered it with a grateful nod and moved to a quiet corner. Ranger lifted his head, followed, and settled again, the dog's presence a steadying gravity. Jack scrolled through the images from the cabin, wide shots first, then details. He ignored the obvious, the cot, the bowl, the bird. Those told a story already heard. He looked for the mistake, the human fingerprint left by habit rather than intent. He found it on the third pass. A coil of rope hung on a peg near the door, neat as a thought finished before being spoken. Jack zoomed in until the pixels broke into a mosaic, then backed off just enough to see the structure. The knot wasn't decorative, it wasn't quick, it was precise. A taut line hitch, dressed cleanly, the tail aligned and set for adjustment under load. Jack felt the familiar click of recognition, the way a weapon fits a hand that knows it. You didn't tie that knot to hang rope on a wall. You tied it because you always tied it, because your training taught you to leave lines adjustable, because your life had once depended on it holding under tension. Ranger, Jack murmured. The dog's ears angled toward him, eyes bright. Jack smiled once, thin and brief. Found something. He stood and crossed the room, tablet in hand. Sarah looked up as he approached, reading his face before the screen. What is it? This, Jack said, turning the image. That knot. It's a taut line hitch. Sarah's brow furrowed. So? So it's not a generalist's knot, Jack said evenly. Survivalists use simple knots when they can. This is muscle memory. Rangers, wildland firefighters, search and rescue, people who spend their lives in the woods and need lines to hold in wind. The room quieted. the way it does when a good idea lands. Sarah leaned in, studying the image, then straightened. Jed could have learned it. He could have, Jack agreed. But he wouldn't bother here, not for storage. This is a signature. Sarah nodded once. What else? Jack swiped to another image, a scrap of paper recovered from a bin, creased and stained. This, he said, tapping the words. Supplies for the high post. The phrase had been dismissed earlier as vague. Jack watched it sharpen in Sarah's eyes. High post, she repeated. Observation. Defense. They're not running, Jack said. They're relocating to a position they prepared, one that watches approaches, one that buys time. Sarah turned to the map wall, fingers flying. The topographical display bloomed, ridgelines rising like frozen waves. She filtered structures, then decommissioned sites. One point remained, stark against the white-green sprawl. Osprey Peak, she said quietly. Old ranger station, decommissioned in the 90s. Jack nodded. Highest point for miles, 360 visibility, hard to approach without being seen. Fortress, Sarah said. High post, Jack corrected gently. Orders snapped into place, a small team only, pre-dawn movement, radios tight. The command unit shifted from despair to purpose, with the speed of trained minds given direction. Jack clipped his gear, checked Ranger's harness, and felt the old calm settle over him. The calm that comes when the path ahead is narrow but clear. They moved before dawn, the world a gradient of blue and silver. Snow brightened as the sky lightened, each step a calculation. Ranger led when he could, nose skimming, then looked back when the wind stole the trail, checking in without breaking stride. Sarah moved with them, careful and quiet, breath controlled, her earlier fatigue burned down to an ember by focus. Two agents flanked, men in their 40s, solid, faces lined by years of doing this work without applause. One, Mark Alvarez, carried himself with a boxer's economy, scar along his jaw from a case that had ended in a hallway brawl years ago. The other, Tom Keller, was broader, beard trimmed tight, eyes kind in a way that came from having kids and choosing the job anyway. Osprey Peak rose from the forest like a held breath. As they climbed, Jack read the mountain the way he read men, where it offered cover, where it demanded payment. Near the summit, they slowed, using trees and rock to mask their approach. The ranger station appeared through binoculars as a skeleton of wood and weather, gray boards silvered by age. But there were signs of life that didn't belong to ruins. A stovepipe newer than the roof, a window patched with plastic sheeting, a path cleared of deadfall. Someone had been careful here. Someone expected company. They surrounded the structure in silence. Sarah signaled. The door came open with a controlled crash that the mountain swallowed whole. "Clear?" Alvarez called from inside, surprise sharpening his voice. Jack and Sarah entered together. The room was bare but warm enough to matter. 2 sleeping bags lay on the floor. A pot sat on a small stove, water gone tepid. On a crate rested a book open to a page Jack recognized from the notebook. The Queen of Light, copied carefully, lovingly. But there were no people, no child. The weight of being late pressed in. Sarah's mouth tightened. She turned to speak, then stopped. Behind the station, Ranger had not relaxed. He paced, nose working furiously at the ground beneath the building. He ignored Jack's soft command, a rare breach that told Jack everything. The dog's whine sharpened, nails scraping rock as he found something hidden in plain sight. A set of heavy wooden doors nearly flush with the earth, sealed and mossed over. "Here," Jack said, voice low but urgent. Sarah was beside him in an instant, eyes narrowing. "Cellar." Ranger scratched, then froze, body trembling, not with aggression, but with something purer. Jack knew the signal. This wasn't the scent of a person moving away. This was fear pooled and concentrated. Sarah lifted a hand to the team. Silence fell. From beneath the doors came a faint sound, wood shifting, a bolt drawing back. Jack set his stance, heart steady. He placed a hand on Ranger's back, grounding them both. Whatever waited below had been taught to hide, to be quiet, to believe silence was safety. The doors burst open. Ranger's bark split the thin mountain air, sharp and wrong, not the sound of triumph but of alarm. Jack Carter dropped to one knee instantly, palm pressed flat against the dog's broad back, feeling the tremor there. This wasn't the scent of pursuit or flight. This was fear. concentrated and raw, pooled beneath the floor like a held breath that had learned not to move. Snow beyond the ranger station glowed pale and perfect, the summit bathed in a clean morning light that made the moment feel almost holy. Jack knew better. Heaven was often built over hell. The wooden doors beneath the station shuddered. A bolt scraped back, metal on wood, the sound small and enormous all at once. Jack shifted his weight, body angled to shield the opening, heart settling into the steady cadence of old training. Sarah Reed raised a hand, fingers spread, freezing the team. Her face, pale, sharp, eyes rimmed with sleepless resolve, was carved into focus. She had seen doors open onto too many kinds of ruin to be surprised now. The cellar doors burst outward with desperate force. A young woman exploded into the light, dragging a child by the arm. She was in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, with a thin, wiry build that spoke of hard days and harder choices. Her brown hair hung in a tangled curtain, matted with sweat and grime, cheeks hollowed, skin sallow beneath windburn. Her eyes were wide and darting, pupils blown with panic, the look of someone who had been running for a long time and finally realized there was nowhere left to go. Cassie Stone, Jed's niece, moved like an animal cornered, breath tearing in and out of her chest, one hand clenched around the child as if letting go would mean falling. The child stumbled into the light and the world seemed to tilt around her. Emily was smaller than Jack had imagined, her thin frame swallowed by rough clothes that hung where they should have fitted. Her hair, once perhaps light, was now a dull tangle, cut unevenly as if by necessity rather than care. Her eyes, too large for her face, were dark and deep, reflecting the sky without taking any of its color. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply froze, breath coming in quick, shallow pulls, as if sound itself were dangerous. Jack moved without thought. 2 strides closed the distance and he placed himself between Cassie and Emily, not touching, not grabbing, just becoming a wall of muscle and certainty. His body blocked the child's view of weapons, of shouting mouths, of hands reaching too fast. He did not look at Cassie. He did not need to. Everything he had learned in war funneled into this one act: protect first, explain later. Agents swarmed Cassie in a controlled blur, hands securing her arms, voices firm but low. She fought for a second, pure reflex, then crumpled, strength draining as reality finally caught her. Sarah stepped in, her presence calm and absolute, eyes scanning Cassie's face for signs of violence, of deception, of collapse. Cassie sobbed then, the sound breaking out of her like a dam failing, shoulders shaking, knees buckling as the cuffs closed. Emily remained where she was, rooted to the boards, gaze locked on Jack's chest as if faces were too much to process. Jack lowered himself slowly, deliberately, making himself smaller. He did not speak. He did not reach for her. He let his stillness do the work. Ranger approached and lay down a few feet away, dark sable body stretched flat against the wood, head low, tail giving a single tentative thump. His whine was barely audible, a request rather than a demand. "May I?" Emily's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to Jack. The fear there was ancient for a child, learned day after day in the dark. Jack held her gaze and breathed slowly, exaggerating the movement, letting her see the rhythm. When she didn't retreat, Ranger inched closer, stopping when Jack's hand lifted. The dog waited, respect first. The mountain held its breath. Sarah straightened, relief softening her features for the first time since dawn. "It's over," she said quietly to no one in particular, the words shaped by hope more than certainty. The agents moved with practiced care, radios murmuring updates, medics called in. The ranger station, once a ruin, had become a sanctuary by default. Jack stayed where he was, eyes never leaving Emily. In the glassy reflection of her pupils, he saw something that yanked the past forward like a hook. Another child's eyes, another place, another promise he had not been able to keep. The image hit him like a physical blow, but this time it did not break him. It focused him. Not again. Cassie's sobs slowed, then broke apart into words she did not seem to mean to say. Sarah crouched in front of her, posture open, voice level. Cassie's face was streaked with tears and dirt, her mouth trembling as she tried and failed to hold on to whatever story had kept her going. She looked past Sarah, past the agents, and for a moment her eyes met Jack's. In them he saw it clearly now. Not cruelty, not fanaticism, but terror of someone else's disappointment. The fear of a subordinate who knows the plan is bigger than her, and far worse. "It's not..." It wasn't just me, Cassie choked, words tumbling out between breaths. She made the maps. She knew the routes. She said the mountain would hide us. Sarah's head lifted a fraction. Who? She asked gently. Cassie squeezed her eyes shut, shoulders curling inward. When she opened them again, the name came out like a confession and a plea. Dr. Megan Evans. The name landed with a quiet thud that rippled through the team. Sarah's expression tightened, the professional mask sliding back into place even as the implications took shape behind her eyes. Jack felt Ranger's body tense, the dog's ears flicking at the shift in energy. This was not the end. It was a door opening onto another room. Say it again, Sarah said. Cassie did, softer this time. Megan Evans, she planned it. She said it was the only way. Snow drifted across the open doors, sunlight catching in the flakes, turning them into brief sparks that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Jack stayed kneeling, one hand open on the floor, a steady presence Emily could anchor to. She had begun to breathe a little deeper now, the rhythm of panic easing just enough to allow space for something else. Ranger slid closer, stopping when her gaze flicked his way. He lay still, offering warmth without demand. Sarah stood, turning the name over like a blade. We'll take it from here, she said to the agents, voice crisp. Secure the scene. Get her safe. Jack felt a hand brush his shoulder, Sarah's, light and brief. Good work, she said, and meant it. Emily's eyes lifted at last, meeting Jack's. There was no recognition there, only exhaustion and a fragile question. Am I allowed to be here? Jack nodded once, slow and solemn. Yes. Behind them, Cassie's sobs resumed, quieter now, the sound of someone who had run out of lies and discovered too late that truth could still hurt. The mountain watched in silence, the sky wide and mercilessly beautiful. Beneath that beauty, another path waited to be followed, one that led away from the summit and deeper into a plan built by someone who understood the land and the mind far too well. The door under heaven had opened, and it had not finished opening yet. The cabin sat far from plowed roads, a research outpost tucked into a bowl of timber where snow lingered like a held memory. Dawn arrived clean and bright, light pouring over the valley until the white ground seemed to glow from within. Megan Evans waited inside as if she had been waiting for years. She was 39, slight and straight-backed, with short brown hair cut for practicality rather than vanity. Her skin was pale and drawn tight over sharp cheekbones, the color of someone who had learned to live indoors with maps and grief. Her eyes were intelligent and utterly hollow, the gaze of a woman who had burned through sorrow until only ash remained. When the agents entered, weapons low, voices calm, she didn't flinch. She didn't reach for anything. She simply stood, hands open, as if the fight had left her long before they arrived. Megan had once been a conservation officer, a botanist by training, the sort of professional who could read terrain the way others read faces. She knew the mountain's moods, where water pooled after thaw, which ridges held wind, which gullies swallowed sound. That knowledge had been a calling once. Loss had twisted it into a weapon. The helicopter rotors chopped the cold air as she was let out, and for a brief moment she looked back at the trees, not with regret, but with a distant tenderness, like a person saying goodbye to a language they would never speak again. Jed Stone and Megan Evans faced justice together, though they never shared a glance. The courtroom was warm and bright, a contrast that felt almost cruel. Jed remained composed, his gray beard trimmed by policy, his pale eyes unrepentant. Megan sat still, hands folded, jaw set, a scientist listening to conclusions she already knew. Words like kidnapping, endangerment, and conspiracy were read aloud, measured and heavy. The sentences came down like winter's final decree. Life behind concrete walls for the ideologue, the strategist bound by the very rules she had rejected. Cassie Stone testified through tears, her thin shoulders shaking as she spoke of manipulation and fear. The gavel struck. The room exhaled. Emily's world was smaller then, and brighter in the wrong ways. Hospital lights hummed softly, machines whispered, and gentle hands startled her. She was quiet, clutching her mother's sleeve as if distance itself were dangerous. Mark and Helen Miller never left her side. Mark was broad and steady, his face lined by nights without sleep. Helen was slight, blonde hair pulled back, eyes the color of winter sky when it decides to clear. To Emily, Helen was the queen of light made real, reading fairy tales in a voice that did not rush. Emily didn't speak at first. She watched. She learned the rhythm of safety, one breath at a time. Sarah Reed stood in the hallway outside the room more than once, tablet tucked under her arm, posture softened by fatigue she no longer hid. She had learned to be sharp to survive this work. Now she learned to be gentle to finish it. She spoke less, listened more. When doctors asked for patience, she nodded and meant it. The case was closed on paper. In practice, it had only begun. Jack Carter did not push his way back into Emily's life. He waited for the invitation, the way you wait for dawn without demanding the sun. When it came, it was quiet. A call from Tom Brooks, a simple, "They're asking about you." Jack arrived without uniform this time, wearing plain clothes that made him look like any other man carrying a bag of oranges and a careful hope. Ranger came too, dark sable coat brushed clean, nails trimmed, harness left behind. In the yard outside the Miller's home, snow lay bright and unbroken. Ranger lay down at a respectful distance and did nothing at all. That was the gift. Weeks passed, measured in mornings that arrived clear and cold. Emily learned safety in rituals small enough to hold. She learned to name trees again, pine, fir, cottonwood, each name a stake driven into the present. She learned the sound of water under ice and the way wind spoke differently to aspen than to pine. Jack taught without teaching, walking beside rather than ahead. Ranger listened with her, his breathing a metronome she could trust. When she wanted to approach, she did. When she didn't, no one asked why. Emily's voice returned the way winter loosens, gradually, without announcement. A word here, a whisper there. Laughter surprised them all one afternoon when Ranger's tail thumped a buried stick into the air. Mark laughed too, a sound that broke something open in his chest. Helen cried and didn't apologize. Sarah watched from the edge of the path one day, her coat zipped, her hair catching light, and allowed herself a smile that did not check the time. The invitation came in spring, though snow still held the higher ground. Mark and Helen asked Jack to be Emily's godfather on a day when the sky shone hard and blue. Jack tried to refuse, words tangling, humility colliding with memory. Helen took his hand. "You stayed," she said. "That matters." Jack nodded once, eyes stinging in a way that had nothing to do with wind. On a morning that felt like a promise, they walked a wide trail above the valley. Snow glittered like sugar in the sun. Emily moved ahead with the confidence of a child relearning joy, her hand occasionally resting on Ranger's thick fur. Jack followed, the mountain opening before them. He thought of another child, another place, and felt the ache soften into something he could carry. He knelt beside Emily at a clearing and asked her to listen. She closed her eyes. She named water, wind, a woodpecker's knock. The mountain answered kindly. They sat together on a sun-warmed rock. Ranger rested his head on Emily's lap. Jack looked out at the ridgeline and felt the past grow quiet, not erased, not forgiven, but settled, like snow that has finally stopped falling. Emily opened her eyes and said softly and clearly, "I'm not scared." Jack smiled and believed her. The snow no longer felt cold. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, in the loyalty of a dog who refuses to give up, in the courage of a man who chooses to stay, and in the gentle hand of God guiding broken paths back toward the light. This story reminds us that even in the coldest winters of life, we are never truly alone. God works through ordinary moments, faithful hearts, and unseen strength, turning pain into purpose and fear into healing. What was meant to destroy a child became the place where hope learned to breathe again. If you're watching this and carrying your own silent burden, may God's peace find you right where you are. May He protect your family, strengthen your heart, and remind you that no darkness is too deep for His light. Please share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. Your words may be someone else's miracle. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, loyalty, and redemption. May God bless you, watch over you, and guide your steps today and always.